to Leadership Beyond Burnout. This is the sanctuary for leaders who are done pretending like everything's fine while they silently run on fumes. Here we explore what it truly means to heal, lead, and succeed without sacrificing your soul or your sanity. In each episode, we invite bold, brilliant minds who've navigated burnout, breakthrough, and bold reinvention. This episode will feature me exclusively. Now, this isn't just leadership as usual. This is the revolution of the resilient, and you're invited to pull up a seat to our fire. So let's dive in. Today's show is called Beyond Bossy or Soft: How Masculine Leadership is Burning Women Out. It's going to be juicy today. So I thought this would be a really good topic because this was something that really challenged me as I began my leadership in the United States Marine Corps, which, of course, is a male-dominated organization. And I wish someone had told me some of these things when I was growing up in my leadership journey as a young Marine. Now, as a young Black woman in a hyper-masculine environment, all of my leadership models were basically men. So I did what I thought any high-achieving woman is trained to do, and that is I copied what I saw. That was my nurture instead of my nature. Sometimes my interpretation of that was harsh, it was brash, it was command and control. It worked until it didn't. So I carried some of that same put some bass in your voice leadership style into civilian life. And what had protected me in one context started costing me connection. It cost me trust and my own nervous system in another. Now, here's the pattern I want to name. When leadership is coded as masculine, a lot of women and a lot of men put on this armor that disconnects them from their natural relational strengths. So over time, that begins to show up as stress, self-doubt, and eventually burnout. And just to be clear, today is not just about men are bad and women are good. Masculine traits are bad and feminine traits are good. We're going beyond that. Today, this is about leadership energies, and we're all allowed to use our masculine and feminine strengths. So let's not be reductive. And how women in particular, they pay a price when only one side of that spectrum gets rewarded as real leadership. And I'm sure a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen when you are considered soft that that's problematic. And when you are hard driving, hard charging, that gets praised and rewarded. So let's begin to change this language a little bit so that it's bigger than just old school gender roles. In the research, you'll often hear two clusters of traits. That's agentic, which could be considered masculine traits, and communal, which is often equated to feminine traits. Now, agentic traits are things like assertive, decisive, task-driven, competitive, and power-oriented. Now, they line up with what many people still imagine when they hear strong leader. Lots of studies on leadership stereotypes show that these agentic traits are still strongly associated with how we picture leaders in our heads. And when we talk about communal traits, these are things like relational, cooperative, empathetic, and supportive. You see, even when I said it, I presented myself differently. The communal traits are focused on care, connection, and the well-being of the group. Research on gender and leadership stereotypes find that those are more often associated with women and with caretaking roles, and consequently, they're often devalued. So here's the key. Every human being has access to both sets of traits. They're not biologically locked into men or women per se. The real issue is which set gets rewarded as real leadership in your culture. What do you see as being valued in your workplace culture? Or if you're an entrepreneur, which traits do you tend to reward and acknowledge and praise? Research on leadership stereotypes and gender shows that leadership is still more often defined in those agentic, stereotypically male terms. Now, at the same time, studies on women's goals and values show that many more women are socialized more toward communal priorities, relationships, fairness, care, and collaboration. So even though these are defined as communal roles, I hope that you are getting the picture that they are not exclusively a tool of the male or female gender. So you can probably even hear the clash. Lots of times the roles require people to be highly agentic. Even when you look at the key tasks and responsibilities, they are defined as highly agentic. And socialization says be highly communal. And when a woman is in the middle and is trying to hold both spaces without getting punished, that can be quite difficult. Now, on top of that, a lot of research expectations for female leaders finds that women in leadership roles are often expected to be both and instead of one or the other. So strongly agentic and strongly communal at the same time. If they lean toward being too communal, they're seen as weak or not leadership material, not quite ready for a director position, for the C-suite, because they're not just there yet. If they lean too agentic, they're often seen as competent but cold, abrasive, too much, angry, and let's face it, quietly communicated the B word. And I think we all know what the B word is. So here's a question for you. Where did you learn what real leadership is supposed to look like? And whose body was wearing it when you define real leadership? You can even take this moment right here and just pause and close your eyes and see what images, what sounds come up for you. What does it look like for somebody to wear real leadership? Now, in the literature and what's espoused in company cultures are usually the communal traits, but what's actually felt and experienced by employees or by those asked to be in roles of governance and guidance is that the agentic traits are expected. Now, when women put on this agentic mask, let's talk about what this mask might feel like. In male-dominated spaces, it is very common for women to adopt a hyper agentic style to be taken seriously. I know that was something that I did when I was in the Marine Corps. I was very hyper agentic because I wanted to be taken seriously. I was very young and I just mimicked what I saw in other males to the nth degree. So the research on personality traits in bosses shows that both male and female leaders often end up sharing those classically masculine or agentic traits like dominance and emotional toughness because that's what the role rewards. That's what the company rewards. So when women dial up their toughness, they begin to mute emotional expression because it's going to be undervalued. They over index on control. They learn to lead just on one channel because that's what they see as working. That's what they see as being rewarded. And who doesn't want to be rewarded? Who doesn't want to be recognized and acknowledged and given the promotion, given that golden carrot? But there's a built-in double bind, right? Gender and leadership studies show that when women are too communal, they're easily dismissed. They are nice, but not a strong leader. They're approachable, but they can't really drive change or handle the initiatives. When they're too agentic, they often face social and professional backlash. People see them as less likable, even when they see them as highly competent. So there's this reverse thing that happens. On top of that, the emotional labor index goes up exponentially. A lot of the research on women's leadership and emotion finds that women leaders are often expected to do more of the invisible work, just as they're expected to do invisible work at home. Things like soothing hurt feelings, maintaining the harmony, managing the emotional climate of the group. So you end up with a woman leader who is performing toughness just to be able to clear the bar of real leader, right? Whether they want to do it or not. Performing that extra care work to keep everybody regulated. That's a lot. This is absolutely a recipe for exhaustion. So not only are you managing yourself, you're managing everyone else and trying to meet up to this external bar of validation just to move forward. And I keep leaning on studies today because there's a lot of information on this that is just not shared in leadership spaces with women, with men in general, people in charge of doing the promotions. So studies on women's leadership and emotional demands connect this pattern with higher strain and more burnout risks, as well as more ambivalence about staying in leadership roles long term, because it's just exhausting to be able to balance that tightrope and be able to like who you are when you go home. Because you're putting on all these masks, fulfilling all of these things and making everyone happy except yourself. So I want you to ask yourself, where have you turned the volume way up on toughness? When did you turn the volume way up on toughness? Like, who taught you that? And way down on your own tenderness or intuition. Just weigh it down because it's devalued. Because you were afraid of being dismissed. as not being ready, not being serious enough, labeled, or punished for those communal traits, for those feminine traits. Really, close your eyes and think about that, because a lot of times we are just so busy in engaging in the acts that we miss when it all turns around. Because most people, when they get these roles, they're very excited, they're ecstatic, and it's this slow deterioration of who you are and who you want it to be in this role. It's like that version of who you are gets suffocated. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is a hopeful part. And this is the science of androgynous leadership. When researchers begin to step back and look at what actually predicts effective leadership, not just what people stereotype as a different picture that shows up, right? Some work on gender values and leadership talks about what's sometimes called as androgynous leadership. Leaders who can flex both agentic and communal traits instead of just being trapped at one end of the spectrum or the other. When a leader is able to embrace androgynous leadership, these leaders they're clear, they're decisive, but they're also relational and collaborative. They can hold firm boundaries as well as hold human complexity at the same time, because we are complex beings. We're not either or, we're and. We have to live in the and. Studies on transformational leadership and gender suggest that this blend of strong direction plus genuine care is closely tied to the kind of leadership that inspires people, that drives change, and builds trust. And there's a lot of lack of trust in leadership in the United States, in relationships. And so when you're able to embrace both this androgynous form of leadership, it just increases trust. And let's see. So here's an interesting piece. Women often end up developing that blended style because they have to navigate these contradictory expectations and begin to quick change and morph into who they need to be. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about, not my age myself here, thinking about those old Lucille Ball shows when she'd change quickly from a male male garb to female garb to fulfill the role that she had to get what she needed to happen. And that's what's happening symbolically for a lot of women in these roles. The research on evaluation of male and female leaders, it shows that overall, women are rated as just as effective as men, and sometimes more effective, especially when they are allowed to bring their communal strengths into play alongside strong agency. Now, that's what the research shows. And even as I said the word allowed, it was distasteful in my mouth. Because that connotes that someone gives us permission to do that. And I want to suggest that you begin to allow yourself the permission to embrace androgynous leadership. Communal leadership behaviors like empathy, participative decision making, and support are associated with better engagement, trust, and follower well-being in multiple studies. It just shows up time after time because you're caring about the work, you're caring about the people doing the work. And consequently, they care about getting the work done. It just makes sense. A lot of the global surveys on leadership traits also show that the qualities people now say they want most, what they want absolutely the most in leaders are increasingly communal. They want honesty, they want fairness, they want supportiveness, and the ability to listen, not just being a master or task driven. So feminine leadership traits, they're not soft extras. They are quickly becoming a necessity in the workplace for males and females. They're performance drivers that have been historically undervalued because they were coded as feminine. So take a breath here, right? Ask yourself, what is one agentic trait that I own without apology? Like that is just yours and you're going to keep it no matter what. Like maybe that's decisiveness, you know? Maybe it's clarity. Maybe it's holding firm boundaries and holding people accountable. Also ask yourself, what is one communal trait in me that I've been underrating or hiding? Maybe you have the skill as a very deep listener. Or maybe you have emotional insight and instinct. Can you make that your leadership superpower? Can you identify the place within your organization, the place and the time? Because timing is correct, right? We have to use all of our skills when they're required. What would be a good time to implement some of those communal traits? Because when it's time to be agentic, you need to embrace that agentic trait. When it's time to be communal, it can be very effective because that's what's required at the time. So now let's get practical. Practical. How do we reclaim our feminine capacity without losing our edge? How do you begin to lead with both energies without losing your edge or yourself? First, you're going to need to do some identity work, right? You have to ask yourself, how much of my leadership identity is imitation? I know a lot of mine was. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of mine was. And it did not work in the civilian sector. I quickly saw that I was going nowhere fast. So how much of your leadership identity is imitation and how much is integration? How much do you need to integrate into an androgynous leadership style? Whose voice is in your head when you think, I have to be professional? And what does professional mean? Is it, if you're prior military, is it a former commander that you imagine in your head? If you're not in the military and you've always been in the civilian sector, who did you put your eye on first and say, I want to be like that? I want to have that type of style. I want people to pay attention to me. Have you evolved beyond that? Does that still work for you? Was it a boss from your early career times when you were just a little wee baby in your career journey? Is that someone who led you with a very narrow, very agentic template? And if they did that, I'm just curious, how did it feel? Not how effective were they, but did you even enjoy working for that person if they were strictly and solely very agentic? Or could you not wait to bolt out of the door each day? Next, we're going to have to begin some behavioral shifts that we can play with, right? This is not a rigid time you to begin to cultivate who you are as a leader and reclaim some of those communal traits. You can begin to pair it with you can pair directness with care. So it doesn't have to be brash, harsh, or bold, right? You can be direct and show people that they matter. Research on how we evaluate leaders shows that when women combine clear, agentic behaviors with visible concern for people, they're often judged more fairly and seen as more transformational. Did you hear that? When women pair agentic traits, those behaviors, with visible concern for people, they are judged more fairly and seen as more transformational. So stop just using one side of leadership. Cultivate a style that's able to be direct and caring. So instead of, here's the decision, take it or leave it. And most people don't say it like that, but you get the drift of that. You might say, here's the decision we're making. And that might be because you've taken feedback from multiple parts of the team to develop that decision. Now, are there times when you have to make a decision without the team because there's an urgency? Absolutely. And so at those times, you have to make that decision, but you can communicate with the team why it was done that way. And if there's something that needs change on the back end, that can be done. So you might that shows how you can support people through the change as they begin to learn who you are now, who you're becoming as a leader. And people love seeing change. They love to see that people can grow. It also encourages them that they can grow in their leadership style, and that actually gives them a new role model. So you can still be decisive and care for others. And in that decisive action, you're not abandoning your communal lens. You can still be decisive through that and taking care for how things are on your team. 2, you can begin to bring relational questions into high stakes spaces when you are there. So that doesn't mean necessarily, I like to say, bringing the woo to C-suite meetings, but you can ask those questions. A lot of the studies on leadership and crisis communication suggest that leaders who name emotional impact and those stakeholder concerns, not just the task details, they are seen often as more trustworthy and effective, especially women, because you can see some of those details that get lost. They get lost in the sauce when we're trying to accomplish tasks and forgetting the people in the midst of those tasks. So when you're making a big call, ask out loud, who is going to be hit the hardest? What support will they need from us? It's basic consideration. That is feminine communal wisdom in action. And it's also good risk management. You eliminate problems in the future by taking a holistic view of who's impacted. Because a lot of times the little person are seen as things on the periphery, things we can clean up later. But that foresight and forethought to ask who's impacted, that's important. 3, you can begin to set boundaries around emotional labor. The research on women's leadership and emotion makes it clear women are often quietly expected to carry extra emotional work, mediating conflicts, doing behind the scenes support, being the office mom. Who wants to do that? That creates what some scholars call a heavier crown, right? For women leaders. Heavy is the crown. Okay. So part of reclaiming your feminine capacity is not just signing up to be the sole emotional shock absorber. You can begin to say, I'm available for this kind of support, right? Define that. And for this other kind. So we need to have shared ownership, or we need to bring in HR, a coach, or another resource so that you are living in your strengths. Even as a therapist in the past, I knew what my strengths were as a therapist. And there were some things that I knew they just were not my strengths. They're not things that I want to address or work with because it just doesn't feel good when I attempt that because it goes against the grain who I am as a person. So I didn't specialize in those type of things. Okay. So as we talk about bringing other specialties, I want to bring it back a little bit to my own story. When I shifted out of that Marine hardened version of leadership, I didn't throw away my edge, right? I still value clarity. I value standards and accountability. But I let go of unnecessary harshness. I didn't have to beat my chest every time that I had meetings. I started listening to my body instead of just my training. I allowed my relational intelligence, the psychology, the empathy, the pattern spotting to come all the way online, to make it mesh, meld together into a cohesive strategy that worked for me. So does my feminine leadership, my androgynous leadership, those communal and agentic traits that blend, does it look like some other person? No, probably not. But it's what works for me. And my leadership not only became more effective, it became more sustainable for my nervous system and more humane for people I led. And one of the ways that I really found out how much I lived within those agentic traits is I took the trimetric leadership evaluation with a good friend of mine, Amy Budd, with Whole Heart Ranch. She is an excellent tester, assessor, and is able to communicate what you receive quite well. So I score really high on the D in the disc and some of the other measures. And so that makes I take a little extra care when I relate to people because I know that I tend to lean as a very, very high D on those agentic traits. So here's what I want to land on this. The goal is not to fix women, right? We're not trying to get screws and hammers and change them so that they can fit better into narrow masculine leadership roles. There has to be room. The goal is to expand the definition of leadership itself. So all of us across genders can use our full range of agentic and communal capacities without penalty. Research on leadership stereotypes shows that as long as we keep equating leadership with stereotypical masculine traits, women will be seen as less natural leaders, no matter how effective they are, and they won't be liked. Studies on role expectations at the top also show that women do get into senior roles and they're allowed to lead with more communal style. It can actually benefit the whole organization, but they're still walking a tightrope. And men lose in this system too. Men who want to lead communally, who are empathetic, collaborative, less dominating, can also face pushback for violating masculine norms. They're also seen as soft sometimes. When we adopt this more expansive blended model of leadership, it betters everyone's nervous system. So I'll leave you with three questions to journal on this week. Number one, where am I still wearing a mask in my leadership? Think about the spaces where you feel you have to armor up. Okay? That might be a real clue that you're wearing a mask. Number two, what are so-called feminine or communal trait in me is actually a leadership superpower waiting to be legitimized? How can you redefine that communal leadership trait as a positive superpower? Is it your intuition? Is it your ability to read the room or your deep commitment to fairness? I know that I have a very deep commitment to fairness and advocacy. Don't let me see an underdog because I am fighting for them all day long. Number three, what is one small way that you can model blended leadership for someone coming behind you? Someone who's looking for permission to develop their own leadership style, to step into their superpowers and blending the agentic and communal leadership traits and styles. Because somebody is watching you the way you once watched those early leaders in your career. So if you're tired of contorting yourself into someone else's leadership costume, right? It's time to take off the mask. If your nervous system is over it, this is your invitation. This is your invitation to explore a different way where your feminine and masculine capacities are not enemies. There are tools that you can consciously choose from. And if you want support building that kind of integrated nervous system, safe leadership, this is exactly the type of work we do inside Phoenix Rising and at Leadership Beyond Burnout. So on the screen, you should see the QR code for the VIP access list for Phoenix Rising. This is going to be an exclusive opportunity to get a sneak peek and work inside Phoenix Rising and test it out and see if it's right for you. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, and you can find me here every Thursday from 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. Pacific. Until next time, we'll see you then.